So religion is not because man has a spiritual yearning, because we have a sense of God innately or see him in the creation. No, it's because we need someone
Yeah.
to relieve our misery economically, is the lower classes. John, this next one has nothing to do with sex or marriage. It is about a completely different topic. It's about immigration and critical theory. So I'll read the question, and we'll dive into the connection between those two political footballs. This person writes, is there a connection between critical theory and the debate we see over immigration in our country? I've wondered why there has been an increasingly sharp divide on the issue of immigration in the last several years. I know it goes back to Worldview, but I couldn't connect the dots. I saw a bumper sticker today, actually a collection of bumper stickers that said, Black Lives Matter, love means love, no human is illegal, etc. So I began to wonder if there was a connection, if the underlying philosophy and worldview of critical theory is speaking into the immigration issue. Is there an unstated assumption that all Americans are privileged oppressors and every immigrant part of the oppressed? Or does critical theory cause that perception, right or wrong, to become the dominant issue in immigration above all considerations? It's a good question. It's well phrased and well thought out.
Very well thought out. And I would say the answer is the second, which, let's repeat it, critical theory causes the perception that to become the dominant issue in immigration above all considerations. And that's because critical theory is a theory of everything. That's another way of saying worldview, but it's not in a kind of purely philosophical sense, but it is in the let's embrace assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of morality, and the nature of humanity,
and let's put it
together. What's that?
And then cram everything into that.
Well, and then make it the hammer and everything else a nail, and
Right.
that's the thing is we've done a number of things on this because there are right now it's a debate within Christian nerdy circles about whether critical theory is a worldview or a tool, and I maintain that it looks like a worldview, acts like a worldview, treats everything in worldview terms. So it looks like a duck, acts like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck, whatever else a duck does, and so you call it a duck, right? And that's what critical theory, I think, has emerged as. And for example, I thought about this with our very first question about adoption agencies. And I've said for a couple of years now that, critical race theory is this year, critical queer theory is next year. And when critical queer theory gets applied to adoption agencies, your sister, is it your sister or your cousin or somebody in your family you mentioned earlier?
Right, it's my sister.
Yeah, that's struggling because they answered the questions wrong about being tolerant and open. We've already seen the academic articles that say, gay and lesbian couples are just as good as heterosexual couples, maybe even better. And to where there's a preference, there's an assumption, right? I mean, when an athlete competes and is transgender, it's historic. Right? In other words, it's better. This is a momentous occasion. So therefore, when a same-sex couple applies for adoption, they're the good ones. Why? Because of these predetermined categories of oppressed and oppressor. So to the immigration question, there is a strong push in many circles, particularly those that have embraced critical theory across the board as the explanation or theory for everything, to see this oppressed-oppressor dynamic in the immigration issue. So therefore, immigrants are the oppressed, which means they have moral authority, moral standing, a government or a state with laws, particularly America, has moral culpability or moral guilt because of its status as the oppressed. So yes, that does shape the conversation. I'm not sure that it shapes the conversation on a political level yet. I'm not sure that we see that across the board, although you see some of that rhetoric from open borders sort of folks. The immigration issue is an issue of reality separate from critical theory. So what I am worried about in this question, or at least in how I answer, and I want to be very careful, is that we have become many Christians, many conservative Christians, we have developed a really bad habit of taking a political position and then stamping Bible verses on it as the Christian position. Or because we disagree with the way a particular issue is talked about, the issue of policing or the issue of immigration, then we say, if you bring that issue up at all, then you're coming at it from a wrong worldview. In other words, to bring the question up, to bring the issue up at all is critical theory. And we've talked about this a number of times on the race issue, that, we have people that are saying, if your pastor uses the phrase structural racism, leave the church. Now, what your pastor may mean by structural racism could be completely wrong. It could be seeing structural racism as the theory of everything, right? Which is often the case these days. Or it could be recognizing that evil itself has a structural capacity, and therefore a grave evil like racism, particularly its history in America, will probably have structural expressions in America. And that's not a controversial thing to say, or it shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. I think the same thing's true here. I think to say that people that are concerned with how the immigration process is being handled are therefore coming at it from a critical theory perspective is just wrong. There are people that are concerned. I mean, I'm concerned right now, the flood of the border. And, you had the tendency of people within the last administration, not everyone, but some in the Trump administration, to talk about immigrants as if they're less than human and fail to make the important distinction between legal and illegal. Although sometimes they did, but a lot of times they didn't. And a lot of times there was these kind of definitive words and names called, and it was really unfortunate. You also have in this administration the at least the idea where the border's being absolutely flooded by unaccompanied minors. Their attempt to handle the problem looks an awful lot like the last administration's attempt to handle the problem, but suddenly it's detention facilities instead of cages. And you have all of this kind of at work, and you have people that are expecting a free ride. Dear President Biden, please help me on T-shirts, because there's an assumption that these borders are going to be open, and it's intriguing people to come. Both of these things are wrong. One may be more wrong than the other, but I'm just saying immigration is a political football that goes way back, that we have struggled to figure out. We need both strong borders. We need better policy. We need easier pathways. We need to deal with people who are, for example, children who didn't cause the problem. And then whenever we talk about refugees, which this week President Biden lifted the number of refugees, and we've critiqued the Trump administration for claiming that they were going to, all the way back in 2016, help Christian persecution around the world. And they did do many things to help Christian persecute. One of the things they didn't do is open up a pipeline for refugees. And then this category, this unique category of people from another country that are in big trouble and that we could help and so on, gets lumped together with immigration. And whenever I say that out loud, I get hateful messages on Facebook saying, how dare you, and that sort of stuff. Right. So my problem is this is one of those issues that gets so absolutely confused top to bottom. And yes, there's an entire group of people that are superimposing critical theory on this, but it's an issue separate and needs to be thought of separate through biblical categories. What are those biblical categories? Image of God, rule of law, grace and forgiveness, a solid recognition of the fallenness of humanity, the Christian responsibility to care for those in need, and that. And the biblical approach to this right now is convoluted, where you have some people basically taking instructions to Israel and superimposing them on America, and you've got other people that are taking, rule of law passages out of nowhere and superimposing them. And the biblical reflection on this needs a lot more work. With the acknowledgement, this is a really hard one. I mean, everyone on Facebook that's an immigration expert isn't, because this is a really, really, really hard question to navigate. And I'm gonna get hate mail just from that answer, right? Which couldn't have been more nuanced, but it's just, yeah.
Well, inevitably, and the reason you're gonna get hate mail, John, is because this has become a bumper sticker issue. Everything's politicized now. I was talking with someone. I was talking with Wayne, our producer, a little while ago, and we were talking about how just vaccines are politicized, masks are politicized, the kind of car you drive is politicized, and your position on immigration is supposed to be determined by which political tribe you fall into. Despite the fact that this has been very much an issue where people on both sides have wrangled for forever in all sorts of ways with all sorts of solutions. It's now become you're either pro-immigrant or anti-immigrant, which is like a nonsensical position. I can't even nobody can explain to me what it means to be pro or anti-immigrant, but that's just the way it is now. It's a bumper sticker issue,
Right.
and that means it's rooted more in identity signaling than in considered policy approaches, or even, John, in like the application of a worldview. So this bumper sticker clad car this listener saw, I doubt very much if you talk to that person in the grocery store, he or she would be able to explain the precise connection between the Black Lives Matter bumper sticker and the Love is Love bumper sticker and the immigration one. It's just immigrants are people too. Well, of course immigrants are people too. What does that mean, and how is that connected with your broader political and
Hey, there's going to be a vaccine
framework?
bumper sticker on that same car in 2 weeks, man.
Yeah, of course.
There will be.
And it's all
I got the
about
Fauci ouchie or whatever it's called. But that's going to be.
Did
that's
you just
gonna
make
be
that
the
up
bumper
just
sticker.
now?
And by the way, I've seen that car.
Oh, that was
dozens
terrific.
of times in Colorado Springs. Colorado
terrific.
Springs is such an interesting place because you got the mountain hippies and you've got the conservatives and you got the immigrant. It's just
The number
everything
of,
in between.
of marijuana leaf stickers on the back of cars in that place was unbelievable last time I was there.
And I do think there's more bumper stickers per square foot of automobile in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
Man, Colorado Springs people love some bumper stickers, man. You see, I mean, and you get the whole kind of all the way around covered sort of thing. You're like, I don't think that's actually
Right.
legal, but
Right.
yeah.
And
Anyway.
the point of that is, what I'm saying is, the point of that is not so much, here are my political positions and I can defend them. The point is, here's my identity, right? I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative. And it's very much the equivalent of the sort of trigger the libs attitude that you see on the right. They're going out there trying to trigger right-wing drivers is the whole thing. It's just an identity play. And people, that's not to say, though, that people don't get influenced by critical theory and the way of thinking that critical theory inculcates in a person subconsciously. So you can be influenced very strongly by a critical theory Marxist way of thinking about things in exactly the way you said earlier, John, as treating it as a theory of everything. That this is the consuming, all explaining reality that, right back to the original Marxism. We don't even have to talk about modified versions of it. Original Marxism was all about, hey, all the stuff that goes on in history, religion and wars and social strife and everything else, it all comes down to economics and class warfare. That was the theory of everything that Marx proposed. And it's all materialistic. So religion is not because man has a spiritual yearning, because we have a sense of God innately or see him in the creation. No, it's because we need someone to relieve our misery economically as the lower classes. Same thing is going on here. Now, the thing I want to say that I'm going to get hateful mail from probably is that this can happen just as much on the conservative end as it does on the liberal pro-critical theory end. So I see a lot of conservatives pushing in this dangerous direction of seeing critical theory under every rock. So anti-critical theory becomes the theory of everything. It becomes the explanation for every progressive position or thing I don't like. And we have to be, it sounds like this listener is being careful of that. The last line there maybe makes me think this person is already awake to that possibility. But we want to be careful not for this to become a boogeyman, that we see under our bed at every turn on every issue. We have to think rationally about issues like immigration that are not clearly outlined by some cut and dry scriptural passage, but that are very much caught up in issues of U.S. constitutional law and application of policies and being a good neighbor to your very different countries that border you, and then having mercy and showing just giving help to people who desperately need it, like the refugees you were talking about. But that requires careful thinking. It requires becoming informed on the issue and actually, forming an opinion that's not the result of identity signaling. It's not the result of a bumper sticker mentality where I just want to show people who I am and trigger the right people. If there's ever an issue that we've got to be careful to not fall into identity camps on, I would say it's immigration, and that's the way that the two administrations and the media have talked about the change at the border, or the alleged change, the language alteration that you're talking about there, John, is just symptomatic of it. It's like a Democrat's in office, therefore the border must be better managed than it was before, and it's just more complicated than that. So I'd love to give those two warnings. Don't fall into a theory of everything on either side of this question. Think through it, and don't fall for the identity signaling.
Yeah. There's something I think interesting too. We talked about this, I think last week, or maybe Maria and I did, talking about President Biden's speech, is in the way we hear immigration talked about, and especially the immigration crisis that we've had now for how many years? I mean, a long, long, long time. Nobody's got a good idea or a good answer. We've got a bunch of intermediate ideas, but no one's got the real strong solution. But there's a thought that my guy is good on it and their guy is bad on it, as opposed to we are all struggling with this and we don't know what to do, and we're saying that the other guy is the mistake and they have done things wrong and so have we, and everything in the middle. There's this sense that politics can fix everything. I was just this morning listening to Shane. I know this is an issue that we talk so much about on Breakpoint, the demographic decline. So the New York Times Daily podcast is finally going, oh, there's a demographic decline. I'm like, hey, welcome to the party.
This has been going on for a while. We were sounding this alarm like 2012 or something.
Oh yeah, we're 10 years into this one. Yeah, I've been talking about this for 10 years in talks. We've been talking about it on Breakpoint at least that long, and but you just hear the punchline. You could almost expect it. I was waiting for it, right? As this demographer is talking about the issue, and the question is, well, what policies will fix this?
Right.
What policies will fix the fact that people aren't having enough babies? And this is of course the same, ideological camp that gives us The Handmaid's Tale as a stark warning against Christians forcing people to have babies.
Wouldn't it be a bizarre history, John, if The Handmaid's Tale actually came about, but it was because of liberals who had finally recognized that we need to stop the decline in our population instead of
not in America, but in developing nations, it's already happening. The Handmaid's Tale is prophetic, but it's talking about the reproductive industry that's being driven by the sexual revolutionaries. But that's another point. I mean, you have basically enslaved women, in Pakistan and places like that. But that's another point. But yeah, it's just this expectation that public policy can fix all the world's problems is a way of understating the impact of the fall. And the other thing that came to mind when you were talking there too is how important it is for Christians to take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. Paul says we tear down strongholds, we tear down, the lofty ideas of man. But you don't do that just by pointing out and name-calling critical theory. Critical theory is on the ascendancy. I think it's more influential than we think it is. I think it is growing, particularly in academic circles. I think, it's just like postmodernism, its forebear back 20 years ago, whereas all the, there's going to be so many evangelical colleges that are like, we're cool now, let's be, emergent. And it's like, yeah, postmodernism happened a decade ago, welcome to the game. But they're going to embrace it because it's the cool new idea. I think we're going to see the same thing in evangelical colleges. The way to combat this is not just to, as you said, point it out under every rock. It's to give better ideas. Better ideas. Ideas that are built around the assumption of that Christianity reveals. And this is my best opportunity in this Q&A to push the Wilberforce Weekend, because the whole thought of the Wilberforce Weekend's theme around the image of God has essentially been two things. Number one, the image of God is an essential component and an under-recognized and an under-taught part of Christian worldview. That what it means to be made in the image of God is something that we know as maybe as trivia, but we don't know actually what it means and how it should shape our vision of life in the world. And second, that just like all the creeds and the church councils dealt with a heresy that had risen to the top of the culture and needed to be addressed. Anthropology is a critical part of cultural witness. Underneath all the issues, including this one, is this fundamental disagreement about what it means to be human. So we are going to have to figure out not just how to point out critical theory when we see it, certainly not how to overreact when we don't see it, but we think we see it, but more fundamentally, come up with better ideas. And that's going to happen on the ground. It's going to happen through the work of Christian intellectuals, Christian academics, and we're going to have to raise a new generation to build their worldview, not out of an oppressor narrative, but out of a creation narrative, and out of a God and image of God narrative. And those are fundamentally different starting points, which means the map's going to look really different.
And good policy is going to flow from that bottom up,
or at least better policy. There's,
right.
That's the darn thing about being a Christian. We don't believe in utopian policies, but as much as we'd like to. But at the same time, it'll be better policy because it'll be truer, more true. Yeah.